Okay, excellent. Thank you. Thanks, Sophie. All right, welcome everybody. This is the Housing Advisory Committee for Monday, March 28th, 2022. Our first item of business, can we have an approval of the agenda? Does anybody have any questions or comments about the agenda?
Nope.
No?
I'll approve. All
Move
good.
it. Okay. My only quick question was for Daniel. I know there was a couple of late items introduced. Should they be in that business arising for minutes when we only have about 10 minutes, or do they need more time or attention?
Probably the detached secondary suite one. We just had some other thoughts just to share with the committee. So you discussed it last meeting, and this is sort of just a follow-up.
That's what I thought. Okay, good. So that doesn't need too much time. Okay, great. Yeah. So we have it moved. Anybody second the agenda? Thank you, Ron. Okay, all in favor. Looks good. And I can't see Maureen. I can't see you, so I'm going to trust that since you have not objected, that we're all good. Thank you. So let's see, adoption of minutes. Hopefully everybody's had a chance to look at the minutes from last time. Anybody have any questions or comments? No. So far. Okay, can I have somebody move them? I'll move them. Okay, Ron will move them. I will second them. Everybody in favor? I'm going to take that as a yes. Okay, moving along. Public comments. Do we have any members of the public? Not that I can see in the list. Nope. Okay, moving right along. Delegations. John Reid. Thank you so much for joining us, John. So hopefully you've got the guiding questions. We've called them in front of you, and feel free to use those to guide your discussion, or feel free to take it on a completely different tangent. They're just sort of there to help guide the discussion. So I'll let you take it away, and happy to jump in if there's questions, or please feel free to go ahead.
Okay, thank you. I guess I'm going to follow along, at least to start, on your questions there, and just wrap number 1 and 2 together. My thoughts on housing on Bowen, and what do you want and how can we help you get there? I don't really want anything except for the island to figure out what it wants. And if you look at your regulations through the land use bylaw and the official community plan, it's quite clear when you look at the land use designations what the community has wanted, at least in the past. And for as long as I've been developing on Bowen Island, that has been single family homes, and basically low density, large lots, single family. And that's what you've got. You've got, a while back, the last time I looked, several years ago, it was 92% single family homes. We're a little better than that now, but we've reached a population, of 4,300, which is well over halfway to this imaginary goal of 7,200, that we like to talk about, even though when we get there, we'll see what happens. But the conversations I see in the community now, and the reason your committee is formed, is to find out, what we can do about our housing problem. And our housing problem is that it's all single family, it's all, getting to be multi-million-dollar houses. And we kind of need everything but that. And for me, in the past, it's been very easy to go, for 20 years, I've been doing low density, large lot subdivisions with lots of parks and green space. And that equation was, quite successful, because we left half the land as park, we connected it greenways with trails, had large lots, very rural feeling. But it delivered you what your OCP has asked for, which is something that lacks everything else. And going forward as a developer, I can't do that model anymore. And it's not so bad when you're bringing to the community as the developer an application to rezone properties to the OCP. And the OCP, for the most part, that's what I've been doing. But now what you want is, you want me to deliver all those same things, except we want smaller homes, multifamily, accessory buildings, cottages, all these things that I can't do because the OCP, although there's 150 pages in the OCP that you can read through and find supporting documentation for everything you want to do, and others can find documentation in there for everything they don't want you to do, to fight you on it. Bottom line is that Schedule C of the official community plan and the land use bylaw designation still say we want 1.5, 1, 2.5, 5, 10-acre lots. And so I can't, so that leaves the door open for people to come forward and say, you don't match the OCP. The OCP says you're supposed to do very low density and put it all in the cove. And so that's where we're at. That's where I'm at. It's a very multi-year process. It's very difficult to ask people like me and others to do it on our own, to come to the community with a proposal and tell you time and time again why I think it's a good idea. It's much easier if the community would just do an OCP review and update the thing so it actually reflects what the community as a whole wants to see. So I don't have to personally fight that battle with, there's always going to be somebody out on the far edge of things that will disagree, and probably many. And there certainly will be, quite a few going forward, because we're changing the way we used to do things. It was low density, so that was simple. We could kind of agree. Prices weren't so high, 10, 15 years ago, but now they're ridiculously high. So it's not a battle I want to fight on my own. I think Bowen Island needs to figure out what they want to see for the next half of their OCP. I could go on for hours about all the things, that I'm sure we all know what we need and what could make things better, but there's roadblocks in there. It equals more people and more density and more infrastructure and more impact on ferries and all these things. And that's just too much to ask developers to, or any private landowner to fight on their own. I know I don't want to do it. At Grafton, that was the first real development where we had to do that. We did change the OCP, and it took me 3 years to get through to the end. And and then it takes you, I'm 6 years into it now, and we haven't, we've got contracts for sale on lots, but we haven't got a penny out of the place. And I'm not about to embark on another 6-year process before you can get to the end of something. And the other thing is the uncertainty of it. Could very well have gone at it for 2 or 3 years and been told no. So I think the community really has to take another look. It's been 10 years, I think. Daniel, correct me if I'm wrong, since we did a full review of the OCP. Everything I hear now is, we want everything but single family. So, but the OCP doesn't say that. So do an OCP review. I think it's a perfect time. You've got basically a moratorium on Snug Cove for the next 5 years or whatever it is. The municipality needs to kind of take a deep breath and digest all the capital projects that kind of hit them all at the same time because of government grants and COVID and all these things suddenly were enabled, and it's quite a load on them. So I think just sit back, Bowen Island does a review, figures out what they want. This would be as good a time as any to do it. That's sort of how I would answer 1 and 2.
That's great. Thanks, Jeff. That's really helpful. Yeah. Yeah, please keep going. If those questions are of interest, or if there's other things you want to talk about, please go ahead.
Well, the third one, that's a real struggle. I don't have anything, right now that I'm considering thinking. I think about it all the time, but the problem I keep coming up with is land values on Bowen have gone so high that to take a lot, a 5-acre, 10-acre lot that's probably today worth $1.5 million, and figure out how to put all the infrastructure in to serve, a lot more smaller things that are worth a lot less. It's just not, and to try to do it in places where we don't have municipal services. The bulk of the island isn't in Cove Bay water or sewer or, other municipal water systems. And to do a lot of multifamily type things, they need to be served by, community water. They need to be served by fire protection. And our regulations are getting tighter every year. It's not like we're 50 miles out of Kamloops or something and you can pretty much do anything. On Bowen Island, it's really no different than developing in West Vancouver. So the expectation is, it just makes it very difficult. And we don't do or haven't done real infrastructure planning. It's one thing to rezone the OCP and say we want all these things, but you got to back it up with, services that enable it to happen. I can't go out in the middle of the island somewhere, buy 20 acres and build all these things myself, not connected to anything. When I started Evergreen 15 years ago, I tried to join the community water system, but we had that mindset that, no, we're going to protect all our little fiefdoms of these different utilities that didn't want anybody else because they had some water and they're afraid they didn't have enough for the next person. At Evergreen now, I got more water than they do from all the wells that we drilled to serve individual lots. So we have to start thinking about how to build the infrastructure as we go and think ahead of it. So some of these, and think where you want the infrastructure, where you want the development. There's big gaps on the island right now that have no firewater protection. And I just, one thing I think, I'm just rambling now, but one thing I think should be done is someone should create a map of all the dark holes where there's no fire protection and publish it so that we can think where we might start and start creating infrastructure that will serve the island for firewater and whatnot, and also serve for enabling some of these things you want to do. So thank you. Somebody said something.
Thanks, John. Yeah, no, I think, welcome, Fritz. Hi.
Now my laptop completely died and it takes time to charge. Just, I have a new one, and of course the link came on the old one, and
no problem.
Finally got a little power.
Yeah, good. We're just listening. John's in the middle of going through some of our questions and giving us his thoughts.
Okay, good. Oh, that's John, right? Great.
Yeah,
John.
yeah.
Hello,
I think.
Oh, yeah. Hi, John.
Hi.
So I think you sort of touched on already. I don't know if you have further thoughts on number 4, like what you can see improved. I think you were just telling us, doing from infrastructure planning. You mentioned already reviewing the OCP. Is there anything else that you think in terms of what the municipality, is within their powers that they could be improving?
No, that's my main points, and I don't like to water them down by a whole bunch of little things.
Yeah.
So that's really how I feel about it.
Mm-hmm.
And
are you able then, so number 5, to provide an update on recent projects? I know you've sort of touched on it, but
I know. Yeah, I can give you that. But before that, it was just one thing I wanted to say, and that was on the accessory building front. I know you guys are looking at changing the sizes of, the lot sizes for allowing secondary buildings. But I just wanted to talk about, accessory buildings are great and they serve a real need, but more often than not, they're built for family needs because the cost of construction, the building an accessory building and all of that, if you said 1,000 square foot accessory building and 350 square foot, you're not spending $350,000 to provide something to rent to somebody. You're doing it initially for your own family, for one reason or another. And eventually those will find their way into the rental pool as families change and, you know, people die and move on and sell. Then they become very valuable to the general rental pool. And they are a place where people can live the rural lifestyle that, you know, they don't have to live in an apartment in the Cove. And so they're really valuable for all of those reasons. But they cost too much, and they don't serve initially the rental market or the worker housing or that kind of thing. And I think this is just personally me, on larger lots, and you can determine what that is, but to me it's, you know, an acre or above, or 2 acres and above, allowing the simplest things, the most cost-effective and easy things. Like I have several properties where I could just pull a trailer in tomorrow and hook it up, and someone's got somewhere to live. Wouldn't cost me a third, or would cost me maybe a third, depending on what I pulled in. And someone would have a place to live tomorrow. And it wouldn't impact people, I don't think, as much on the larger properties, because they can be completely out of sight and you're not impacting the neighbors. As you drop the lot sizes and all that, and with the accessory buildings, you have to be more and more cognizant of impacts on neighbors. But on the larger lots, and we've got an awful lot of them, I don't see why you don't, you know, loosen it up to allow the micro homes, the RVs, all these things that, you know, help in so many different ways, including the ferry and the impacts on that, and having to bring people here. And I don't mean just temporary, I mean allow it in place of an accessory building. If you don't want to spend $350 and you got 5 acres, pull in a mobile home and put a deck around it and let somebody live there.
What do you think, John? I'm curious, what are the infrastructure implications of that? Like, presumably you'd still need a septic system, you still need water, like those basic things?
Yeah, you'd need all of that, but it's the main body of the house. You know, to build a house on Bowen Island with the building permits and all the processes and engineers and you name it, it's just insane. I built one for $72,000 15 years ago, right beside me here. And I didn't do anything, but it was really simple. You just got a building permit. You didn't need an engineer or any of these other things. And every day we're adding another thing, and I'm not going to list them, but every day it's, oh, it's just this, we're going to do this. And it's another 10 grand, another 15, they all pile on. So that $72,000 guest house would cost me, you know, $300, $350 today. So to answer your question, yeah, you need all the same infrastructure, but you already have a well, you have your road, your driveway, you know, most of the infrastructure's in. You have to upgrade your septic field maybe. Power's generally nearby, but that body of the house is a lot cheaper if you go buy a trailer or a micro home or something. And quicker, you know, it's very easy.
Yeah, no, I think that's really good feedback as well. Thank you.
Okay. As far as number 5 goes, I wrote it down somewhere.
Oh, yeah, I'm providing an update on your recent projects and timelines.
So at Grafton, we're completing phase 1 now. That's just the first 12 lots on the lake side of the road, dedicating the land around the lake as park. And we also are starting now on what we call 1B, which is the 5 duplexes that is affordable for sale. That construction on that is going to start. We've already started the land works, but we're not quite at building permit yet. In Evergreen, I've got my 3rd phase at Evergreen, which is sort of underway. That'll be 2023 before it's, you know, towards the end of 2023 before that's finished. And that's, again, you know, same thing from the past, large lot, expensive single family home. At Grafton at phase 2, we've started clearing for that, and the planning, you know, we've applied for subdivision. The planning's well underway to build. There we'll be building single family and duplexes of a restricted size, like 25% of them will be 1,200 square foot homes, and 75% will be 1,800 square foot homes, some of which will have below market rental within those homes. So that's, 23, 24, probably 24, because we're going to be building the houses there. We're not just selling lots. So not only do we have to build all the infrastructure, but then we have to build the houses. So most likely 2024, start to see some of that. And then we also have within that whole development, plan for neighborhood office space, sort of shared spaces, sort of community office spaces. That's built into our zoning. But we won't start that until we have a population living there. So sometime after phase 2 is finished, and as we move into phase 3, we'll start building that as well as daycare. One other thing we have zoning for there, we're not sure exactly what the timing is, but we do have guest houses and retreats built into the whole rezoning, and 2 of the guest houses are down pretty close to the road, Grafton Road, and those are 12 bedroom, where 12 bedroom, 2 people per room, so 24 people per building. And they, Daniel, you again correct me if I'm out of line, but we have chatted about this, and the zoning that we have there for guest houses, it can be used for worker housing. It's the same thing. It's just, a different name. So we will be looking at doing that. Not right away. Initially, we're going to clear an area, get a temporary use permit, and pull in a few trailers for workers. But long term, in the same general area, we will be, building quite a bit of housing for workers or whoever wants to rent it on a nightly basis. So that's pretty much all I got, unless you guys have any questions.
No, that's great. Thank you so much, John. Do any of the committee members have questions? Maureen, I feel like you do.
Yeah. Hi, John.
Hello.
I think there may be a member or two on this committee, and I know there will be in the public. Can you just remind us how many units will ultimately be in the Grafton project at full build out?
Yeah, there's 120 homes, like single family, well, not just for sale homes, market homes. And there's 45 rentals, 10 of which will be the affordable for sale, and there'll be 35 rental suites within the homes.
Right. And with the phase 1, that's mostly now all sold, who is buying those lots?
Actually, it's mostly Bowen Islanders. We've sold all the ones that we've listed, except for one we just listed on the weekend. So that's, I think it's 10 lots. So they're all have contracts. And out of those 10, I'd say about 6 of them are Islanders. And a couple more are people, extensions of family of people that live here. It's really only 2 or 3 that I don't know who they are because I've never met them.
Okay, thank you.
And at Evergreen, we did phase 2 at Evergreen, and that was just amazing. There was 7 lots there, I think, and six of them sold to people living on Bowen Island, and 5 of them were kids, people in their late 20s. in the construction industry, or somebody's kids that needed a place where their parents sort of helped them get it going. So that was just quite a surprise to me.
I think it's really encouraging to hear there's lots of concern about who are we building for, who is buying these homes, and there isn't space for locals. But if it is locals, in the majority in these projects.
It is local, but it's the lucky locals, because it's expensive. It's just, none of them would have been able to do it on their own without significant help from family. And that's, I don't think is any different here than anywhere in Vancouver. Parents are helping their kids. And, the people that are getting displaced, unfortunately, the value of the homes has risen so much on Bowen that the landlord that was happy to get $2,000 rent on his $800,000 house is not so happy because that $2,000 rent is on a $1.6 million house. So they sell it to a new buyer, and that family has nowhere to go. And that's why we have to change the OCP, or one of the many reasons to figure that out.
Thank you.
Anybody else have any questions for John while he's here? Yeah, Fritz, go ahead.
Yes, I do. John, I've been thinking, I missed the first part of the meeting, right? But to me, it's like a no-brainer that the OCP needs to change significantly. But I also found that kind of concept of the existing OCP is that everything has to happen in the cove, and that the density has to transfer from the rural lands to the cove. It's kind of like, it's so outdated that I don't think anyone should even look at it. But having said that, and then we have all the issues with the sewer, like the septic, which takes time. And so, I thought it's a bit like that evergreen idea that, with either temporary or permanent septic, you can do some interesting projects. I also remember that you once said to me that any project that you do, if it's really close to neighbors, it's really difficult because it's the process that really complicates it, and parcels that are larger and at greater distance are more suitable for some kind of development. And then I thought, if the community looks at the island more as finds a way to live sustainable on the whole island instead of only in the cove, and then maybe there are pockets, and you kind of refer to it, I think, the pockets where there could be maybe clusters, a bit like Belterra, but in a way that somehow it can easily sustain smaller pockets of modest development island-wide. It doesn't have to be small single-family homes. It can be duplexes, or it's some little other kind of clusters. So what do you think?
Oh, I agree totally. I was just looking to make sure I knew what I was talking about. I looked at the land use designations for I was looking at all the OCP maps, and I looked at the density transfer map, which I agree. I've been saying, it's just ridiculous to assume that I'm going to take a 1 acre lot. I'm allowed 1 unit density. It just happens to be worth about, say, out at Evergreen, about $800,000 now if it has a water view. And I'm going to move that to the cove and build an apartment with it. For one, the economics, it will never happen. And number two, we've already started to give density away where the need is there. So no one's going to buy density. And the area in the cove, you look at that map and look how tight it is. There's no room in it. And if you wanted to move density, I'm not saying move density into the cove. I'm saying if you want density in the cove, you might want to expand the damn boundaries of it so there was some room for the cove. I mean, the cove itself, there's not a lot of, we like to think, oh, there's all these surplus lands and all that. There's not a lot of land. But yeah, as far as finding those areas out within the island that kind of work with transportation routes that are big enough that, you know, you can do things. And through, I also big on conservation development and parks and green space, and cluster it into somewhere where it doesn't impact neighbors. Yeah, that's the equation. It's just a little harder because, you know, that's what we're going to have to do. But, you know, where's the fire water supply and things like that. So that's why we gotta, you know, if you were going to do an OCP review, it would likely be, you know, next term. And between now and next term, you know, you need to let the community know it's coming and invite all those people who have all those ideas that don't want to fight that battle on their own, to throw them at the steering committee and all the different committees of an OCP, so they can vet them and pick out the good ones and the bad ones, and then kind of come up with something that makes sense. Because yeah, we're going to have to do stuff out there, and it's, you know, it's not just next year or 2 years from now. You need to know where you're headed for the next 20 years, and you know, sort of do the thinking for everybody so that they can try to fit into the plan. But right now, there's nothing to fit into. Other communities, which I have no experience in, you know, they decide these things. They make it really easy for the developer. They actually do their OCPs, and then they match the OCP with their land use bylaw. And they say to the developer, yeah, you can do this, you can do it here, and these are all the things you have to do for us, and this is what you pay, and here's all the charges. So the deal's already made. And I think that might be just a step too far for Bowen, because we really enjoy having the safety of the land use bylaw being more restrictive, and the OCP is something you kind of have to go through a process to get to. But so that's difficult enough. But that OCP that you're trying to get to actually has to be what the community has said they want, so that you don't have to fight all the people that say, well, the OCP says don't do that. Bit long-winded, but
no, that's okay. No, I think it's all very enlightening, and some of what you're saying also reinforces what we've heard from the other guests that we've had in speaking this way. So we've got a few more minutes, and then I want to move along. So Ron, you've got a question.
Yes, John, thank you very much for very well-informed and very frank critique of the way things are at the moment on Bowen Island. I'm intrigued by your comment that other communities make it easier, and could you name specifically any communities that you think have best practices in this regard?
I think, you know, Fritz would be the guy to talk to about that, because like I said, I haven't done it everywhere else, but I know in my time here on Bowen, I keep hearing about we're doing it differently, because we intentionally kept that separation. The land use bylaw was like 5 acre and 10 acre lots, and the OCP allowed you to get to 2.5 acre lots. So, and you had to negotiate your way to get there. And that negotiation took place, you know, with council and the public and all that. And we enjoyed that for a long time. But not every community has to do that. You know, the other communities, they decide what they want and they say what you have to do to get to that. And that's a quicker road. So I'm not going to throw out names because I'd probably be wrong, but I think we're the anomaly. Others do it a little bit quicker process. But now, because we're changing so much, it's really scary for, you know, a private landowner, especially doing something for the first time, doesn't have a clue how, and there's actually nobody, I can't point to people. When people come to me and say, why don't you do this for me? I got nobody to say, no, I'm not doing that. Go see this person. And because that person, I don't know who that is. So I think it would really help if the municipality had set the structure up so that, you know, it was easier.
Yeah, I think we've heard that before as well, like taking the risk out of the rezoning process, because that's the huge challenge, right, for people to bring forward. Michael has his hand up, and then I'll go to Fritz.
Yeah, John. So thank you very much, by the way. One thing I'd like you just to expand on a little bit. I was really interested in your comments on the mini home, the trailer home, call it whatever you like. Let's take a 2-acre lot where this can go in beside the existing house. Nobody sees it. And it's joined up to septic, power and water and all the rest. And you've got a home for someone and you've got it there quickly. You know, that's a really, let's supposing, I'm not suggesting it's wartime, but let's supposing we really had to do this, right? Options were off the table. We needed accommodation fast. This is how we would approach it. Just as in my experience, when opening hotels, we needed accommodation for people. We built hundreds of these and we did it within weeks. So just a matter of, could you just give us a little bit more information on what this might look like? You used the word, maybe you didn't, trailer or mini home. Just describe, if we had the ideal 2 to 3 acre lot and we wanted to do this as a sample, what type of accommodation are we looking at here that's, if you like, off the shelf, ready to go, could be put into place and hooked up? Because maybe you could just paint a picture in words here. What type of accommodation are we talking about here that's readily available like this?
Well, just about anything you want. I mean, like a micro home, you can buy that off the shelf and pull it in on wheels. An RV, you can do the same thing. A mobile home can be brought to your home and placed somewhere. A little bigger, a little more room. Then you build a deck around it. Yeah. You know, if you just we talk about our rural, what's the word? We don't want to lose our rural something. Go out anywhere in BC, outside of the towns, and drive on the highway, and what do you see? Cheap housing. Yeah. People have RVs. People live in mobile homes. They're there because they're inexpensive. And we're West Vancouver, or we're trying to be West Van, and we, in our intrinsically rural Bowen Island, we won't allow any of those things. And yeah, you can have an accessory building if you got 300,000 to spend and you want to get it back in about 200 years as an investment. That's why they don't happen. They only happen as a, as a family thing. You know, one thing that I have always, this is something that at one point an idea that I really liked that I thought would be fun, but I can't make it work. I can't in my mind, but we have a place on a lake up in the interior, and it used to be a campground, and they built, the developer came in and they built a foundation, a cement pad, services, put up a big roof over the whole thing. So you could pull in your RV in one side and you could have your picnic table and all that on the outside. And it was about a 700 square foot footprint. And every single one of those now is a cabin. And they build big decks around them and they're really quite nice. But it was a way that you could build that, you know, my imagination was you could build that on Bowen somewhere and people could just buy a trailer, buy this thing off you that was sort of half built. And when that person could afford to turn it into a cabin, they could build themselves a house. And that, to me, it was a way to get people into the market that couldn't get in there any other way. But as I continually think about it, I don't know where to put it. Because then you're into infrastructure, fire, water, and lower values that don't make sense at the starting price of the lots, you know, too high. But somebody will want to do these things. I think, like Fritz said, these smaller scale things, it could quite likely be someone who has 10 acres, they have a house on it, they can isolate themselves in their house on a couple acres, and the land, maybe they want to do something on that because they're already paying for the land. It doesn't really enter the equation. If they want to create income or something, it's likely going to be somebody like that has a lot of land, that partners with somebody. And we don't have to factor in the value of the land to make the development work.
John, would the Bowen Island Golf Club be a little bit of an example, although very different? When we first started, we had this little trailer or this whatever it was. And if you look at it now, it's got decks, it's got this, it's got that, and all the rest. Now, I recognize we're not talking about housing here, but are we thinking along the same lines as something that it was cheap to do at the time, and we did it because it served a need, and then people really worked at it, and a lot of volunteer time and all the rest, and that's what we got. So I just wondered. I think it's a great idea, by the way. And if you talk about speed, by process of elimination, I'm hard pressed to find another way in which we could do things quickly.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, you can do a lot to dress up a little, mobile home with decks around it in the woods. It would be, for the people that need that, it would be like they died and went to heaven. It's not going to be and if I was to do it, near me, I'm not going to pull in some really decrepit thing and throw it in there, and it's not going to devalue. You're going to make sure it's done well. Or maybe there's some mechanism for the municipality to make sure it's done well. But, it's going to be 3 times easier than spending 3 times more to make something like that. And the other thing, if the permanence, the RVs, the micro homes, mobile homes, they're still somewhat mobile. I could put it on a lot that I don't plan to sell, with knowing that I could move it around and not say this is where it's going to be for the next 100 years. So there's a lot more flexibility in providing that too.
Great. And I think, Fritz, did you have one last question? And then we should wrap up and move along. Let John get on with his day.
Well, I think one thing that is more about the Cove, I guess. One thing that is really in the way of development is requirement for parking. We're doing this little project in Gibsons now, and they're asking 1.5 parking stalls per unit. It needs to be below grade parking. We get numbers back from the quantity surveyor that these parking stalls are probably closer to $80,000 each. 80,000. Then if you want, then you say, oh, then if you want the relaxation, that means you have to pay for parking in lieu. But all these things don't really make sense. I sent a little while ago, that was a business in Vancouver, and I noticed it was a really interesting article what people do all over the world to provide more affordable housing. And one of them was actually from New Zealand, and John, you may find this interesting, where they said that if a town has more than 10,000 inhabitants, it's not allowed to ask for parking, period. And but the developer can provide the parking that the developer believes is needed for the project. What I found really interesting in that is that if you want to create a walkable, livable town, and I gave the example of, for instance, Amsterdam. If you go to the center of Amsterdam, people want to live there. They don't expect to have parking because it's so great to live there. Now, if you take a place like Snow Cove, or you take Gibsons, or you take all these nice little cute little places, it's the same. People want to live there. They accept lower parking. Then if you want to create a place where people walk and don't use cars, then don't ask for parking. Then if there needs to be parking for retail, make that separate parking, and pay parking, in a parkade, for instance. But I'm saying is that there's this kind of what you ask for has to somehow be in line with your true objectives. A walkable village. Why do you need parking in it? You arrive in the ferry, you walk off. People want to live there. You see what I mean? It just make any sense to me. This one of them. The other thing that, if you have still some time, is which I really thought the city of Vancouver did is so amazing. With their strength, they put duplex zoning on every freaking single family lot in the city. It was just done more or less. You don't hear any really resistance about it, and it's a very gradual, slow process. Nobody's going to demolish the house the next day. It's so gradual, you know, but and it doesn't eat up land. It's just you can use the same footprint, you can use the same volume, you just put more units in it. That we're doing one of those, I said it before, on 45th and Mackenzie, and there's 4 units, you know, and there's 2 owners. And it says single family neighborhood because it retains the single family character of the neighborhood. I find it so clever from the city. It's just like a very gentle way, and there is no opposition.
Yeah,
Don't call it the duplex zone, just call it the residential zone, single family.
One last thing I'd like to say is, because we're not or haven't been reviewing the OCP collectively as a whole community being part of this conversation, and we're solving things like, okay, we're going to allow this next year, but we didn't really involve the whole community on it. We may find ourselves going somewhere where the whole community is not with us. So, you know, that might be a great idea, but there could be, you know, a segment of the community that feels, whoa, what just happened? What'd you do to us? So that's why doing the OCP review, involving all those that want all kinds of housing and involving all those that want no housing, to be at the table and find the compromises for our next, you know, 10 years of our OCP, and, you know, settle these arguments while we have, you know, while we're too busy to be doing anything else, or while the sewer is being built, and it's just a time to do it.
Okay.
We've also spoke a lot about pilot projects, or just, you know, like, and I give an example that if you, for instance, say somebody, it's not blanket, but you say it's corner lot zoning, like this, the corner lot is more specific, right? It has more frontage, it's easier to put on, you know, like a duplex or so. But that would be not a big step, it's just so simple.
Yeah. Agreed.
Okay, I think we will move along in our agenda here, but thank you so much, John. I really appreciate your time, and I think there was some really valuable insight there. And
Yeah,
I know I've been seeing on Maureen's been, I think, promoting us also on Facebook, which was great. So hopefully the wider community will also be able to look at these presentations from yours and the other developers we've had. I think it's really great feedback. Thank you.
Great. Well, thanks for letting me have a chance to say my piece.
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, John.
All right. Thanks, everybody. We went a little over time on that, but I think it was well worth it. I think we just have to remember to leave more time in our next agendas for those ones, because they're always really valuable discussions. So the next thing is number 5. We have our subcommittee report, the housing targets report. So I think that where we left it last time was we had Ron's draft report, which was really great. And I was going to, I think, or we were going to distribute it by email and sort of review it. And I don't think that happened. And my apologies if I was supposed to lead that off, because it's been an extremely busy month. So I don't know if we want to review it together as a group. I don't know if people had the chance, committee members had the chance to actually read through it in the past month, hopefully. And so maybe we go through it and review it together. So we have about 15 minutes left in our agenda for this item. So does that sound like a good idea for everybody? Yeah, okay. So why don't I'll maybe share my screen here. That's might be the most efficient way to do it. Okay, let's see. This one, hopefully. Which screen can you see now?
We see the Word document.
Oh, perfect. Okay, thanks, Daniel. Yeah, I just set up a second, like I have 3 screens going. It's a little overwhelming. So thank you. Okay, so we'll go up to the top here and I'll make it bigger. Let me know if it needs to be bigger for folks. I don't know how it translates onto your screens. I think unless anybody wants to go quickly through this, Ron did a great job sort of describing his method, which I think was really useful, and who he talked to. So I don't know if anybody wants to go through that. So feel free to jump in and stop me if we want to. I really appreciated that Ron included this section on domestic abuse. I think it's an important thing to acknowledge. I think it's an important thing to acknowledge in terms of housing needs. But I also appreciated his recommendation that essentially said it's pretty much you know, other than if we can, you know, encourage an on-island shelter, it's pretty much beyond the scope of this committee and the municipality to provide that. But I think it's an important thing to have in this report so that people are aware of it. Does anybody have any thoughts or comments on that section?
I just had a question regarding where you see these recommendations going. Is this a draft document for discussion within this committee, or can you elaborate?
So what my thoughts were is, so taking this report and taking some of these recommendations, and then with the ones that we can, I think having it as, gather my thoughts here. The outcome being that we give a recommendation to council on housing targets. That's the idea of what we're getting at. So I see this as like the backup document. This would be like an appendix to that. So this would go through everything. And then there'll be some like this that are recommendations that I don't think should be carried forward to that housing targets because it's kind of outside our scope, but I think it's good to be aware of it. So as we move through it to other ones where, you know, there are recommendations that say, you know, I think I kind of highlighted them. Here's what we think you actually need to do. That would then be carried forward into our recommendation to council, which says, here's what we think you need to address as the targets. And then here's this backup report and where that information came from as sort of an appendix. So that's my thoughts on it. Ron, I don't know if you have do you have other thoughts on that?
Oh,
no? Okay.
It says it well.
Does that answer your question, Marie?
Yeah, it does. But one of the things I really appreciated about this report was that it said not only, you know, what's recommended to do, but what's recommended to not do. And I think having the not do be part of what goes to council as well is super important.
Okay, great.
Yeah. So anyway, nothing more to say there other than thanks for pulling this together.
Yeah. Okay. No, that's great feedback because I probably would have just put in the actions, but I think that makes a lot of sense to actually acknowledge that what we think is not appropriate for action, what we think shouldn't be targets. Okay, great. Anybody else in the committee, any thoughts on this section? There's domestic abuse, and then the next one is homelessness, which I think has been talked about. I can't remember if we've talked about it much as a committee, but I know certainly a few years ago it was, and Ron gives a bit of the background as to the work that was done a few years ago to set up an emergency cold weather shelter. And so, yeah, again, this might just be one of those recommendations where it's come through that it's, you know, other than sort of partnering with existing services and kind of doing what's been happening, there's probably not, there's not a lot that as a municipality that Bowen Island can do directly in terms of like, say, building a shelter or anything like that. Any comments or thoughts on that section? Just watching to see if, and please speak up because I can't necessarily see everybody when we're in this format. Okay, so rental apartments and suites. So we got the history, a little bit of kind of the different needs, and it'll be interesting. I haven't looked lately, and Maureen or Ron jump in about the census data. I know some came out in the last month or two, and I know Ron captured some of it in this report. And probably there's more coming about, so we can capture that if needed and update the report. But we got some just some high level, and I think mostly sort of anecdotal and from the paper kind of information about the need that's out there. I don't know that we have a more accurate way of assessing what the need is in terms of just like, say, talking to existing people and landlords and finding out about wait lists and all those kinds of things. So that's what's captured here. Let's see. And you can just jump in if you want to comment on any of this, or if I'm moving too quickly. I'm just trying to sort of get down to where we actually start talking about what we think actually is needed. Oh yeah, so this was interesting. So Statistic Canada, we did jump from 3,680 to 4,256, which I know surprised me a little bit. And I think when Ron and I were talking about this, we sort of, and I feel like maybe Daniel brought this up at a previous meeting, and but somebody brought it up. It was sort of this idea that there's like this current backlog. There's this current unmet demand. So that's what I sort of tried to capture, is like, what's the current need? What's addressing the current unmet demand that exists as of right now? And then what are those projected needs going forward? So this is very much a draft. This isn't like, I just sort of started to try to put numbers at it and try to put it in a format as to how we could make these recommendations on rental housing. So how I worded it was to address the existing unmet demand and predictable future demand for rental housing. We recommend that Bowen Island Municipal Council adopt the following targets for new rental apartments or suites to be built with an emphasis on affordability. Worry about the grammar later, with up to half of those, depending on access to funding, being reserved for low-income households with current attachments to Bowen Island. So, I mean, this is just a complete draft. So this is the first go. So if people have comments on sort of that wording, and then putting actually some actual numbers to it. So the current need being, say, 30 units, including 15 below market. And then by, say 4 years from now, 45 units total, and including 22 below market. It was a tricky way of how to word this. So it's, and I think Ron and we talked about this when we met, is sort of like how, so we address the current need and then we project forward, because obviously, like as of the end of this year, 30 units aren't going to be built. So it's like, how do we acknowledge and outline what is the current need today? And then how do we build on that so that as we move forward and target, say 2026 or even 2030, how many units do we need to target for those dates that include today's unmet demand and include this future building demand? So I'm very open to anybody's feedback if they have another way of structuring this, or maybe if it's some sort of graph or a table, I'm not quite sure, but it's sort of the idea, like, and again, I'm happy to discuss these numbers. These aren't absolutes at all. These are just suggestions that if we have 30 today, in another 4 years, we have another 15, and then in another 4 years, we have another 15, and those might not be enough. I'm not sure, but that was how I was sort of suggesting to capture those numbers. So I don't know if anybody has comments, or sort of Maureen and Michael, if you have comments as counselors, is this like information useful to see it in those terms, or does anybody else have thoughts?
It is useful, but there's another element, which is the seasonal rental housing targets.
Okay.
With the last meeting of the Community Economic Development Committee, for example, there was a lot of emphasis on the needs of local businesses, and 6 to 7 months of the year when they really needed some space for their temporary employees.
Okay. So that's a whole separate one.
It's a whole separate one. Yeah.
Yeah. Oops.
Okay.
Yeah, go ahead with that, Michael.
Just a small question. I'm just looking at the current need numbers. I presume we're still comfortable that I forget when this was done. We still feel, and I've no reason to believe it isn't, that this is still representative of what we should be looking at. And it's just a question, by the way. It's not saying that it isn't, but the question is, do we still feel that this is representative and where we're at right now? There's no changes.
In terms of the actual numbers, like saying we are 30. Yeah. I think this was, and Ron, jump in if I'm incorrect. I think this was based on essentially kind of the anecdotal. The current number is kind of based on anecdotal information, waiting lists, all of that. So, it's not hard data in terms of census data or anything. And then the projection forward was a little more accurate, sort of based on the growth in population, percentage growth, those kinds of things. So they were a little more, I think, had a little more accuracy behind them. Ron, do you want to say anything?
I would tend to view the current need as expressed there as being probably a minimum, and it's obviously the entire exercise is a bit inexact. But one of the particular problems is the elasticity of demand. In other words, if more units are built, would more prospective buyers or renters show up? There may be a lot of people, for instance, who are currently sharing accommodations, and if more small, affordable apartments became available, they would step up to take them. So that's a potential demand that's really very hard to measure.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Thank you very much. Well, maybe we should put just a little caveat on that. Look, this is to the best this is best estimate at the moment, because it'd be interesting if we suddenly by magic came up with 30 units. does anyone feel that we would still be left, taking seasonality out of it for the moment, do you still feel that we will be left with a significant demand?
I suspect we would be.
Okay, well, then it would be fair to somehow, Robyn, just to put it so that we don't get hung up on a number. This is a best estimate and recognizes, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Because I think it's impossible to come up with a totally accurate number, but based upon this is where we're at right now, but it is a best estimate.
Something like this.
One of the points that's being made by a couple of the developers is that the demand ultimately is unlimited. People will come. So it's more a matter of who are we building for? You know, what is the group that who are the groups that we want to
That's what Allard said. And I think the data really indicate that there's a lot of truth to that as regards single family houses. But I think it's less so with regard to rental apartments. As new single family houses have been developed on Bowen, about 2/3 of them have been bought by people who previously didn't live on Bowen. But as new apartments have opened up, it's been the opposite. About 2/3 of them have been taken by people who are on Bowen. So I'm sure that if more apartments are built, some of those will be taken up by people not living on the island. But I would think most would go to people on the island.
Thank you, Rob. That's important.
And I think, and I just did a little bit of wordsmithing here, that maybe we can work on this wording, but I think having some sort of emphasis on whatever these units like are built and whatever they look like, that there is a chance for people who have a current attachment to Bowen, whatever that definition is, that they're emphasized in that need. And I think that's what Ron was sort of getting at with that is, and this is, remember, this is under the heading of rental housing. So this is specifically for rental. And it doesn't have to be apartments, although that's probably the most likely in terms of rental, or at least multifamily. But it's about this section specifically about rental units. Okay. So does anybody have any further thoughts or questions on this? So if we move forward with that 30 unit number with that little caveat that Michael suggested, our projection of basically 15 every 4 years is kind of the estimate that came out of Ron's research. And I think that, that probably also came from the housing needs report. And then addressing somehow local seasonal needs. Yeah.
Maureen. One point, how does this connect to the discussion we just had regarding potential mobile rentals? I mean, this is all within the frame of new rental apartments. We just had a discussion that said, if we were to, and this is later in the agenda as well, have temporary use permits for mobile homes. I mean, that the need could be met fairly readily, for quite a few people. So
I agree, and I think that's something that we just overlooked in this report. We didn't really address the prospect.
The types, yeah. But I mean, I'm just typing it up now. I think that could be, it's pretty simple to address in a sentence to say, look, this is about rental housing. It's not about the type. So rental housing can be in the form of a multifamily development, secondary suites, attached or detached. And again, that's sort of, I hear what they're saying about secondary suites and especially detached ones being family. So, keeping it open that those are rental possibilities, right? So maybe there's some sort of, again, we've talked about before, bonus density. There's some sort of thing about people if they agree to rent those out. So just keeping that in the mix, that secondary suites attached and detached can be rental housing. And then I'm adding in the sort of mobile home / manufactured home we can even say safe trailer. That's as an option as those rental possibilities. So you're right. I mean, if somebody had the land and could put it in, we could potentially meet those 30, that 30 unit backlog pretty quickly, if or at least a good chunk of it, with something like those mobile homes, manufactured homes, trailers. Okay, and I'm just checking the agenda, and I think I misread it. So we have lots of time to continue to talk about this, which is great. So we have till 11:05 in the agenda for this. So let's keep going, and feel free to jump back if there's other questions or thoughts. So this was we renamed this because I think we started talking about seniors housing and kind of putting a label on it, and I sort of said, well, I'm not sure that that's appropriate, and like so we sort of talked about adult oriented low maintenance housing, and so I think that can meet all sorts of different people at all different life stages. And then we talk in a separate one about family oriented housing. So that's why they're kind of separate, because I think they are different needs, which isn't to say they can't coexist in the same development, but I think they're addressing different needs in the community. So the idea was these are adult oriented low maintenance housing aimed at both seniors and others seeking low maintenance simplified housing. And so it's sort of, the classic being people who want to downsize, also, but there's other people of all different ages that might be, single or without children, or say with grown children, that just want essentially probably a strata property of some kind. That's that lower maintenance. It's not that single family house with the yard and all of the maintenance that goes with it. It's a different option. So sort of addressing those needs. Let's see. So yeah, I think we recognize that the housing needs report didn't quantify what we call sort of seniors appropriate housing. So maybe we'll call this adult oriented housing. Nevertheless, as Ron wrote here, anecdotal evidence confirms that the current and anticipated demand for downsized housing is a growing concern on Bowen Island. By providing housing types that allow people to age in place, we can prevent the loss of long-term residents. So the recommendation that we'll have to maybe reword this a bit. So adult oriented housing. So ground oriented, low maintenance, etc., should be included in any mix of diverse housing the municipality is encouraging to be built, both rental and ownership, and possibly other forms of land tenure. Exact numbers to be included will need more research, including a possible survey. So it's interesting, I think, maybe the way we're structured this report. So we've addressed rental. I don't know that we've addressed ownership separately, because then now this is getting into type. So I wonder if we actually break this into two parts, or maybe even three parts. So one's kind of the background and research. The second is, here's the hard numbers of targets, like the actual unit numbers, rental and ownership, and maybe some other type of tenure. And then maybe there's a third part like this that actually talks about the different types. So addressing family oriented, addressing adult oriented, those kinds of things. Maybe it's multifamily. I don't know. Does that sort of make sense to people? Structuring it, yeah. Okay, hearing no objections, we can move forward with that. So maybe I'll just do a little bit of okay, housing types. Okay, we can make that sort of some kind of heading. All right, and then the next one was family oriented housing. So some information from the housing needs report about sort of levels of amounts of their income that people were spending, which scarily is often a lot more than 30%, and some are even up at 50% of their income on housing, which is not sustainable. And Ron made some comments here about that was only based on income, not including equity and wealth. Yeah, being house rich and cash poor. Don't we all know about that? Okay, so recommendation that BIM actively encourage the development of diverse housing types, row houses, townhouses, multiplexes, etc., through proactive rezoning, so community-owned lands or private lands, and or expressions of interest from private entities. Does anybody have any thoughts or comments on that type of recommendation? Again, this is still kind of a draft. I don't think we're like gonna, maybe, I don't know if anybody feels comfortable. I don't think we're gonna vote on the final version today. But yeah, does people think that kind of addresses it? Any thoughts? Yeah, it's a great report, obviously, not too many comments, so that's fantastic. Next one is physically accessible housing for people with limited mobility. We could actually maybe even make that even more diverse, because it could be people with all sorts of different needs for accessibility. So maybe we could rephrase that.
Can it even be? I've seen things, I forget exactly, but it's like universally accessible housing.
That's a good
and
one.
then you just take out 4. It's just like, that's what the housing is.
Yeah. Universally accessible housing. Yeah. And that's not spelled, I don't think, right? Universally. Close enough. Silly. Anyways, if everybody else knows how to spell universally, I need to do the spell check here. So I need to not have caps lock on. There we go. Oh yeah, so no, it's right. Okay, there we go. It looks weird in caps. I think we just had some comments. Public buildings, sidewalks, buses are accessible. New single-family homes, but no. I mean, I think I wouldn't be necessarily in favor of like City of Vancouver has gone quite a ways to make new homes to be built to certain standards in terms of accessibility, and like that essentially they can be converted kind of later on. I'm not sure that we want to go that far at this stage in terms of single family homes, but I think we're already, I don't know if it does, I don't know if the Bowen Island municipality dictates or if it's been because of other funding sources that we've had, at least in the new rental building. I know there's several accessible suites, and I think that was more a function of the funding as opposed to the zoning. Am I right? Yeah. Okay. So at the moment, as far as I know, the municipality doesn't have any specific requirements for universally accessible housing. So this is the recommendation that BIM incentivize or require fully accessible and or universal design principles on our ground floor units in multifamily buildings. I think that's not necessarily a bad recommendation. I mean, it could be, yeah. What do people think? Any comments?
How would the incentives work, Robyn?
I'm not sure. I don't think we get into that in this report, because we've talked about all sorts of different incentives before. Like Fritz and I've talked, quite a bit about, density or floor space, bonuses, those kinds of things. I think there's different ways to incentivize. I don't know if we get into specifics of that here, but it's sort of more about if you require or incentivize, because I think require is really harsh, right? Like that's saying you absolutely have to do this, whereas incentivize is saying, hey, it's within our power to give you a few extra square feet. It's within our power to give you, one more density unit. Like those are the things within the municipality's power that you could say, hey, here's a little carrot for you to build these units that we would like to see in the community. So I think there's different ways that we could talk about incentives, but do you think that it would be important to have those referred to in this report?
No, it's just when you talk about require, do you mean require all or require some? Even from my hotel experience, when we start putting what was then known as handicapped rooms in, we learned very quickly that, the first instructions were that all rooms had to be handicapped accessible. And then we found out very quickly, well, of course, that obviously wasn't what was intended, required, or wanted. So, yeah, the language is a little bit important, because you're not asking every piece of structure to be fully accessible. That's a little bit of thought perhaps around that sentence, because if you want to give incentives towards accessible designs, great, and then we could leave it at that. I always worry when I see that word require.
Yeah, and I think that's why we've worded it as incentivize or require. And this is a very there's a lot of loose language in this. So incentivize or require fully accessible and or universal design principles. And then I just added for some or all. So it's pretty open. I don't think we're being too restrictive about saying you are required to make it fully accessible on all ground floor units. I think that would be too much. Like, I don't think we want to be that prescriptive. I think if we leave it in sort of this language where it's like, let's look at this. Fritz, you have some comments?
Yeah, because like generally speaking, for family-oriented housing, that's many times desired to be at ground level, so kids can run out into the yards. But I find that for universally accessible housing, normally in apartment buildings, you enter with elevators anyway. So I don't know if it actually unnecessarily restricts it. You know what I mean? Because And also a lot of buildings that, do require parking, they don't really have lower units that's right at park level. I mean, it's not doable, so it should be a bit more flexible.
Yeah, and I think that's what I'm trying to get at in here is it's not meant to be super prescriptive. It's meant to be flexible to say, hey, can we either require or incentivize some units within multifamily buildings to be universally accessible?
Yeah, but
that's all
I
we're
find
kind of getting at. Yeah.
The word ground floor in it.
Yeah.
Actually, not really doing
so
anything.
So do you think it should be gone entirely, just some units in a multifamily building? Yeah, I think you're right, because really, if it's an accessible unit, or it has to be either on the ground or accessible by elevator. I think it's kind of self-explanatory. So I'd be okay with that, deleting the sort of ground floor.
People have so many different needs, right? So then
exactly.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, no, I think that's a fair comment. To let go of the ground floor requirement. Because I believe in the new rental apartment building, that's how they met it, because I don't think that there's an elevator in that new building. So I'm pretty sure they've achieved it by being those ground floor units or accessible ones. So I think you're right, that leaves that flexibility of design. So if somebody is building a building with an elevator, they can put those units anywhere. I know on the Birch project in our preliminary designs, they're on different floors because we have an elevator planned in the building. So okay, so if that's working for everybody. Then we had, vacant housing. This was another, so maybe this could even be titled sort of, I don't know, we could title this something else, like opportunities or something. Or, I can spell. So I think behind this, Ron, was about seeing that there are quite a few buildings that certainly aren't occupied full time. And then I think we've heard from some of our speakers that we've had is that there are a number of buildings that are sort of sitting around empty because of various different hurdles, whether it's water supply, whether it's zoning, or some other reason that they're not being used, and they're there as a possible, certainly rental unit, I think is the most common that it would be. So the recommendation that we had here, that the HAC and or BIM planning department undertake research to discover the extent of potentially rentable properties that are now are vacant, and discover the obstacles in the minds of the owners or in housing regulations that now cause these properties to be vacant. It is further recommended that BIM consult with owners of unlicensed short-term rentals to explore the possibility of converting such properties to longer-term rentals. Do you have anything else to say, Ron, about that recommendation? Or so this one's really about more research to be undertaken to explore those, not necessarily a goal, a target, but more about research. Yeah. I
just thought it seems a shame that one of the developers told us that there are good habitable buildings that the owners are not legally able to rent. I also found it strange that there are unlicensed short-term rentals. Are short-term rentals supposed to be licensed? Yes, I believe they're meant to have a business license. Yeah. Well, that seems kind of weird. I would think either they should get licensed or they should convert. They should be encouraged to convert their rentals into legal long-term rentals. And I don't know why that happens, which is why I suggested researching into it. Mm-hmm. So maybe we could. So does anybody? So yeah, Maureen, go ahead.
Daniel and Fritz have their hands up, Robyn.
Oh yeah, sorry. Go ahead. Thank you for addressing. I'm looking over here. Yeah, go ahead. So Daniel, why don't you go ahead, and then we can, and then Fritz.
Sure. I mean, I know when the undercurrent did that 72, that was from the presentation I gave, to you and then to the EDC. But I think it's a little misleading, I guess, because it just looks at the number of short-term rentals that we have licensed and then the number of listings on host compliance that it finds. But partly it's finding ones where it's like somebody lists each room as a listing or each unit, and we would say that's one license. So it's not 72. But there's sort of always a cycle of, new listings come on, and we contact them and they apply and we work through the application process, and then, then they're licensed. So I don't know the number right now, but it's not 72 that we're aware of that are unlicensed.
Okay.
And then the other piece just was that in terms of the vacant housing overall, like we found the last census, that number had gone down. Like our number, it was like something like 100 of the units that were, not occupied by usual resident now are, or about 25% over the last 4 years suddenly became not vacant. So it's interesting, how much it's changed. And then I don't know how, it's hard with Bowen. It's like, the comparison in here is to the Greater Vancouver number. And Bowen obviously is a much higher number than that, but some of that is sort of the history of Bowen as a like summer cottage place, and people still own them as it's my summer cottage, or it's my place where I stay, and then some of the time I stay in Vancouver or somewhere else. So, whereas I think, I don't know if this committee or we circulated numbers looking at, different Gulf Islands and how does Bowen compare to other Gulf Islands, and kind of the idea that Bowen's kind of in between. If you look at like Galiano or Maine, well, they're much higher numbers of not usually occupied. Yeah, so it's hard to point and say, well, that's where Bowen should be at. We should be like Vancouver, or we should be like.
Yeah, and I mean, I think it's a valid
Yeah.
point, and I certainly personally don't object to those, because that's the history of Bowen. Like you say, like it's, people come here for the summer, and it's I think that's a valid use of, and certainly every property owner's right to use it as they want. I think it's more so maybe we need to, like, I just sort of changed the title, so vacant buildings and short-term rentals. So maybe it's more about, because I think this is more about what are the opportunities that already exist. So what is the existing buildings and infrastructure that already are here on Bowen that for a variety of reasons are not being rented long-term? What are they? And is there some that we could shift and change so that more units do become available that, like, say, can happen very quickly because they're already there, they exist. So one being these vacant buildings that, again, for whatever hurdles, water, zoning, whatever, can't be rented long term. And then the second one being the short-term rentals.
Sure.
So I think, but I think that's really important because it's obviously not coming through here. So maybe we need to sort of just put a little bit of more of an introductory phrase, something like that. Fritz, go ahead.
Yeah, I just wonder if actually the Canada's tax system is to blame for that, because you have the capital gains tax. I think a lot of people may hesitate to rent out because then a percentage of your capital gains become taxable, and there's all kinds of things like that. So maybe maybe somebody who has a better insight in that, because like for instance, one of the reasons why the property values are so high is simply the capital tax exemption. You're talking big numbers, and if people rent out, and then Revenue Canada would dispute their quote free capital gains. Those are huge numbers. So is that playing at the background somewhere? That's my question.
I don't know if anybody else has a comment on that. I'm certainly not a tax expert, and I only know a little bit of my current experience, so I'm not sure that we can dive into the tax reasons, but I don't deny it certainly would be, I'm sure it's a motivating factor for certain people and how they use their property is taxes. So, but I'm not sure if that's sort of just beyond our
but
scope.
I think in reality, if you try to figure out why people are hesitant in renting out part of their property, and if that is one of the reasons, then you can't do anything about it, but then there's no answer for the municipality, so you can't really even try to find a solution.
Yeah, I mean, I certainly know just from personal experience with taxes, it's well, I don't know, I probably shouldn't say anything because I'm certainly not a tax expert, but I think I think there's enough leeway in various tax things, and people can make sort of their decision. I don't think it's a huge encumbrance. I don't think it's like the single thing that's holding people back. I think you're right. It's probably one of a number of issues. But one that certainly the municipality can't address and can't overcome. So I think if we focus more on it could be addressed, for sure. We could mention it here somewhere if you think that's important, Fritz, to say it is a factor. But if we focus on what the municipality can control and what they can change and incentivize and do, I don't think that's one that they have any say in. Have I understood you correctly, Fritz?
I'm just saying is that if you try to find a solution for something that's not mentioned, but that may be a cause, then you know what I mean? Like if you read about the tax system is outdated, the OCP is outdated. There's all kinds of things that are outdated and they don't match current objectives. So if that's one of them, then I don't know if you have to mention it. I'm just thinking, is that one of the reasons that's below the surface?
Okay. And sorry, Michael, you've got your hand up. Go ahead.
Yeah, sorry, Robyn, and I'm not sure I haven't lost the thread slightly because the conversation's moved on. There's one of the recommendations we had, and I'm just thinking the recommendation was quite desirable, probably, but I'm just thinking if looking at Daniel's workload, it's great to make the recommendations. Are we going to make a recommendation of just who might assist in doing this and how it might be financed? Because otherwise it will sit there forever as a recommendation, but it will always be at the bottom of the pile because more urgent things have to be addressed. So I'm not speaking against a recommendation. I'm just thinking it will sit out there as a recommendation. Well, that's great. It's nice we've made the recommendation, but I'm not sure. You know, we better give some thought about how that recommendation is going to be implemented.
Yeah, and I think that's a fair statement. And we've certainly said it could be the Housing Advisory Committee, it could be planning, this for that first recommendation anyways. And that's really these go to council. And if council chooses to make them priorities, then they can assign it to us as a committee, they can assign it to the planning department. It's just sort of us saying, hey, we think this is work that should be done. And it's up to council whether they choose to prioritize it or not. And yeah, I mean, in this case, the first one's really just about research. And, for example, if the council said, yes, this is great. Hey, Housing Advisory Committee, have at her. Then Ron, who's a researcher extraordinaire, and whoever else wants to join him in helping him can, simply go out and chat to people. We've already had at least one or two, I think, tell us in this forum, and there could be others out there. So we can just go and do that little bit of research and then report back. So, I don't think it's necessarily putting a huge onus on anything, on anybody, but I agree with you. We want to make sure that our taking a high view, we want to make sure the recommendations we are making in this report aren't just going to sit on shelf, because that's useless, or just go at the end of poor Daniel's very, very long list of to-do items in his department. There's no point adding one to the bottom when it's maybe never going to be addressed. So I appreciate that thought, that let's make sure whatever recommendations we're making are valid and applicable, and that they have the potential to be actioned by somebody.
And maybe we need to look at all our recommendations as well and say, okay, of all our recommendations, we see this as being the highest priority, and this one maybe not as quite as high as the other one. It wouldn't be unhelpful to know which of our recommendations we regard to be the most important.
Okay, so maybe in this report that we're saying, so maybe do we flag on each one, because I think we did this before in some work that we've done before, where we basically said it was a high priority, medium priority, a low priority, that kind of thing. And it's not useful to say every single one is a high priority. So I think, okay, so that's something that we can add. So let me just make a note. Maureen, go ahead.
Some of the reports that we've looked at have broken it down, not in terms of priority, but in terms of amount of effort, degree of difficulty, and degree of impact. So you could have something that was really easy to do, but very little impact. You could have something really hard to do, very little impact, and that kind of thing helps with the decision making as well.
Okay. I wonder if we could add. Okay. Maybe in theory we could put each one, because I think that might be useful. Okay. All right, let's move along. We've got another few minutes here. I literally just started writing this, so I haven't got very far. Will it be useful, and probably I'll ask very directly Maureen and Michael, is it useful to address the available lands? Like to have that in the report, to simply put it out there to say, hey, these are, areas that we see as potentials, number one, community lands owned by the, and lands owned by the municipality. And then I don't know if we go so far as to say other that essentially would be privately owned that we think are, I haven't got that far. So I haven't thought that far ahead. So I don't know, Maureen or Michael, do you have comments on if this is useful?
I think it is useful,
Mm-hmm.
and it would be in terms of each of the lots and the zoning, and also the projects that are already confirmed for those lots. So,
Okay.
lot 1, you've got the EOI for that received responses. There's etc. There's also the old library lot that's municipal land as well.
Yeah, these were the ones that I saw. So lot 1, area 1, which is that bigger piece pretty much almost across from the school that kind of stretches to the gas station, essentially. That's area 1 of lot 1. Jump in if I'm wrong here, Daniel or anybody. And then lot 1, area 2, which is what the EOI was recently issued. And then there's the old fire hall site, which I'm actually quite interested to see what could be done there. So the new fire halls, opening anytime now. And so then that old fire hall site will be sitting there. And I'm interested because presumably it has sewer, and obviously it has water. Like it must have some level of infrastructure. What the age and capacity of it is, I don't know. But that's one thing I'm interested in, is what could happen at that old fire hall site. And then the old library lot, fair enough. That one's there. I'm sort of less familiar with that one, although I think I know where it is, but I'm sort of less familiar with what could be done there. Is there any, off the top of our heads, is there any other, again, these are community owned lands. We haven't got into private lands. I'm not sure that that's really would be within our purview. I feel like that's more of an OCP's, to get into sort of the whole island.
There's lot 2, the back end.
Oh, yes. I've totally forgotten about that. I can't remember if that has an area or not. So maybe we just say behind Bowen Court, if that's, and school.
That's Seniors Lane, I think,
Yeah, I think that's a description there. Okay. Oh, and then the remainder. So lot 3, right? Remainder. That's certainly there. So that's, I think, if again, correct me if I'm wrong. So lot 3 has the fire hall, has health center, the area designated for Birch, and then there's the whole remainder of it, which essentially stretches behind the RCMP. And then actually it does go down to Bowen Island Trunk Road, but that section's extremely steep. So it's like, it's not the easiest to develop. So can we, okay. So that's a list of sort of available community owned lands. And then, I mean, the only other thought I had in this, and sorry, we're running out of time, so I won't dwell on this too long, would be, if it was a suggestion of, I don't know, because we were just talking about it earlier with John, and we've talked about it before, gentle density, cluster housing, like whatever we wanted to sort of say that, because obviously we all know for different reasons that the Cove isn't going to see any density or expansion for the next, however many years. So if we are looking at other neighborhoods, do we attempt to identify neighborhoods that would be appropriate for that and say, hey, these are some we think would be good, or do we just, is that being too specific? And we just sort of say, no, really, it's up to, because it's up to people to come forward. Or what I'm hoping might come out of this is, again, another, say, expression of interest or something where we can reach out to current property owners who might have land, who might want to develop this cluster housing, a trailer park, or whatever this model is. Like, how do we, but yeah, I don't know if we want to be too specific about areas, unless we say something like serviced by, transit or something like that, which I think John sort of mentioned. I don't know, does anybody have any thoughts about this sort of section of available land? And what we should include there, what might be helpful? No. Okay, I'll just put it as a question mark. Or parameters, maybe I'll put parameters to consider. Oops. Okay, for density outside the Cove. So i.e. access to transit, something like that. Okay, well, that's the end of it. And so I think the only thing I'd like to add in is I'll sort of add in these headings, and then I think I might add in, because we've addressed rental, but we haven't addressed ownership. So I think that maybe that could be, yeah, I think just addressed in some way. And I think the main one being, which is kind of already happening and talked about, and maybe it's sort of editing this a little bit, would just be diverse housing types, right? Just housing types as ownership model. So, you know, like what's happening at Grafton is duplexes, and you know, those the duplexes are happening on Foxglove Lane, and the fourplex there, those kinds of things. So so I'll if anybody doesn't have a thought, I'll just think about that. Maybe it's how it's addressed ownership versus rental, and then the different housing types. So
Well,
Fritz, go
Robyn?
ahead. Yeah.
Well, I think that, like, in general, if all housing is more flexible to respond to changing needs over the lifetime of the occupants and the building itself, because and I think it came up in the past, but you know, like for instance, I give you an example, like we say from all houses should be secondary suite rental, right? But I find what the city of Vancouver distinguishes, for instance, between these lock-off suites, right? The real key of that is it's a part of your house that is designed to be flexible. Therefore, it's much more likely that you rent it out. So there's something about, you know, that all buildings or all residential accommodation, or you can argue all buildings in general, are designed to provide that flexibility, because the problem that we have now with single family houses, that they're designed as a single family house, they may be too large, but it's really hard for an owner to suddenly rent the part out because it affects their privacy. It's just complicated, right? But these lock-off suites is really cool, because, like, you know, the family needs it, it's part of the house, the family doesn't need it, or they need it for, you know, a nanny suite or a caregiver suite, or they can rent it out. It's unbelievable. But it's based in amenity zoning with bonuses for additional floor space. You can say that everybody has to do it, or you can say that if a house meets the requirements for flexible use, you know, providing on and off, you know, either temporary rental housing or more permanent. It's really key to do that, because when you design something, you design that part of the house in a way that it turns it back to the house, right? Like it's not something that you can later. It's really hard to do, but in the design process, it's much easier to do. It doesn't necessarily even cost more money, maybe a little bit, but we're not talking lots of it.
Yeah. And so I'm sort of writing down like lock-off suite and rental ready, because I think that's a similar mindset, right? Is when you're building a new house, is kind of in that design process, thinking ahead.
Yeah, but I think the key thing is, because lock-off suite is something that people, the word lock-off suite even doesn't sound so nice, but anyway, it is something that people may not understand. The core idea is that it's housing that's designed for flexible use, allowing parts of the house to be. It's worthwhile to give a little bit more of a description, so that it becomes more something that people can picture how it would work for themselves. You know what I mean?
Okay. All right. We'll think about how we can include that. I think we're over time already on this section. So if anybody has any further comments, maybe let me know. I will do my best to work on this a little bit and get it out to everybody in a timely manner. So then hopefully at next meeting we could actually like have some recommendations or pass this forward. I think that would be really useful with those housing targets. Okay, let's move on. I'll stop sharing my screen here. So number 6, business arising from the minutes. So we have the work plan. I don't know if I have that open here. I think what the main idea was to talk about what we want to move forward with. So we're still working on setting the housing targets. And is there, I don't know if people have this in front of them. The next we had was encourage more secondary suites. After that, housing reserve fund, cluster and duplex zonings, changes to land use bylaw, which we prioritized later in the year, alternative methods of land tenure. Anyways, is there anything on the work plan that we think we should bring to the forefront? I sort of felt like following John's talk, and we've talked about it quite a lot, maybe it's either the sort of cluster duplex zoning and or this, you know, whatever that zoning might be for a trailer park model, or allowing some sort of land use bylaw change or zoning changes to allow this model of I don't know what we want to call it, more rapid housing or something like that. Does that sound like something that we should prioritize as an action next? What do people think?
Yeah. It's kind of how you describe it, I think, makes a difference.
Okay.
If it's surface pad for tiny houses, everybody likes it. If it's you know, depends how you write it, you know.
Yeah, so I mean, this is what our work plan that I believe has been approved. So I mean, my interest certainly would be in the cluster and duplex zoning, because I think that's something that would be really interesting to bring forward. And then, and I know Fritz, you're interested in the land use bylaw, but we had said we'd leave that later in the year when the new, closer to when the new council will be in. And we have this alternative modes of land tenure. So I don't know how that ties into, or if that's specific. I'm just trying to think about this sort of trailer park model that we're talking about, and that I feel like that's actually more, not sort of so much land tenure, that's more of a zoning and land use bylaw issue, right? Am I right, Daniel, that it's probably that's what's inhibiting it at the moment is, I know certainly trailers, I know, because I think there's just land use bylaws that address that directly. And then it would be a zoning issue. So I wonder if this cluster and duplex zoning could address that, like in terms of the research and us doing a little work on it, could address, you know, hey, because cluster and duplex zoning could be trailers, could be manufactured housing. It doesn't have to be permanently built homes, right? It's just the idea of, it's something that doesn't exist yet on Bowen. Could somebody with an existing, kind of like John said, somebody's got 5 or 10 acres, could they, you know, carve off that front acre, you know, put in some infrastructure and have however many number of people there, the appropriate number. So I feel like that could be captured in this one. Is that of interest to people? Do people want to, I don't know what capacity we have, because I feel like it's like me and Ron and Fritz.
Well, it's like a year or probably about 2 years ago, I kind of started that, you know, to show the size of the lots. I still have that, and I think now with having more, since I have more clarity what we're trying to achieve, it may be interesting to do that. I also think the more graphic and easily understandable it is, the better. You know what I mean?
Yeah, agreed. Okay,
so
maybe we can.
I don't mind focusing on that a bit.
Okay.
Just have to get all the numbers right and run it by Danielle at least once.
Okay. Great. Okay, Ron, did you have any thoughts?
No.
No. Okay, you're good. So why don't we sort of make that our next priority is some combination of 4 and 5 here, cluster and duplex zoning, and maybe looking at some of those land use bylaw changes and how that would affect, or maybe zoning changes or whatever, just how that might affect this cluster and duplex zoning. Yeah. Okay, great. So that can be our next priority in our work plan. And then I will hand it over. So Daniel, we had the detached secondary suite minimum lot size. You just had a quick sort of feedback update for us.
Sure. So yeah, we discussed this at the last meeting, and then in conversations been having since then, and partly in anticipation of John's presentation, we were exploring the idea of, so currently our zoning bylaw allows what's called accessory residential use in almost all residential zones. And then we define that as attached or detached secondary suites. And there's regulations. So those are what say, this is how big it can be. And it has the minimum lot size for a detached secondary suite, which is what we talked about last meeting. But so the idea we were sort of mulling over was, what if as part of that review, the definition for accessory residential use got expanded, where it currently says it's a secondary suite or a detached secondary suite. And one of it just said it's an attached secondary suite, a detached secondary suite, or a tiny home, or something like that. And we would have to work through, okay, how would that work permitting wise? But that would be essentially trying to address one piece of what John had presented, where it said, okay, you know, it can be a detached secondary suite, which is a full dwelling with a foundation and permits, or maybe there's another way that it could be delivered. Sorry, you're mute.
Sorry, everybody. I tried to mute to be thoughtful. Anyways, there we go. And then I forget. So I prefer not to use the word tiny home because I think you're
Right.
talking about essentially like a home not on foundations, right? On wheels, essentially, right? Where you would probably have a pad, whether it's concrete or gravel, and it would be a trailer, an RV, a tiny home, whatever it is, on wheels. So it's not permanently attached, right? Is that, yeah. So I think we could use some more ambiguous language. That would be my immediate feedback. Fritz, do you have your hand up to talk about this, or is your hand up?
Oh,
from
sorry,
before?
no, it's just.
That's okay. Just checking.
I forget.
Yeah, that's okay. Yeah, Maureen, sorry, go ahead.
There's a report that's included in the agenda package, and I don't know if you've had an opportunity to look at it, but it's extremely interesting in terms of this discussion. And I wonder if you could open the agenda package at page 13. There's a paragraph there that I want to show you guys because.
Okay, does somebody have that? Because I've only got the agenda as this sort of web link, so I'm kind of like going to everything. I don't have the one that was.
Yeah, I have it. Do you mean that little table, Maureen? Here.
Let's see what you've got there, Daniel.
Are you showing this one, the practices purpose?
It's
Or am I sharing the wrong?
Go a little earlier in the document. It's page 13 in the agenda package.
Oh, in the agenda package. Okay.
Yeah, we're just about there. So this whole report deals with accessory dwelling units. Yeah, keep going.
This one, like tiny homes?
No, keep going. It's the introductory paragraph to there. No, you went past it. Right there. The term accessory dwelling unit.
Oh, okay.
Right.
All forms of additional units or residential, and maybe either attached, detached, includes secondary suites, on-lot tiny homes, garden suites, duplex or townhouse lockup suites, laneway, and any other dwelling unit. That's the definition that they are working with, and I think it's actually really useful. And their way of conceptualizing all the types of accessory dwelling units that could possibly be considered. And the data in this report about how these play out in different communities, they have a series of vignettes. They look at different communities, talk about what's being done there, talk about whether they actually have successful outcomes, whether it's in play, whatever. But the key point for me is that they start with this much more comprehensive notion of what an accessory dwelling unit actually is, and I think that that may be valuable, for us to consider, as well. So Daniel, I just wanted to get that in there because
Sure.
It's where you and I were talking on Friday about the overarching concept, accessory dwelling unit, or whatever it is, accessory home, basically. And here are the forms. So attached, detached, we got the mobile home trailer, the etc.
Yeah. So are you looking for, other than just sort of feedback and chatting like this, are you looking for anything more specific from us? Because I mean, I'd be in favor of that expanded definition. I think that would be helpful, but it certainly would have some implications, like quite immediately. If you expanded that definition, next council meeting, that's like, overnight people can start to put trailers on the property theoretically. So yeah, I would be supportive of moving towards that.
So I guess what I thought is I'm slated to bring the detached secondary suite lot review size to council probably the last April meeting. So I think it's the 25th of April. And so thinking, oh, if I had some recommendation from the Housing Advisory Committee, then I can present that to council and say, okay, while we're looking at size, do you want staff to consider other changes in that bylaw?
Right.
So I just put in the chat, and I'd written this as tiny home. I wrote this earlier in the meeting, but so that the HAC recommend council direct staff to expand the definition of accessory residential use to include, and I put tiny home in addition to secondary suite and detached secondary suite with appropriate regulations for their use. And so, yeah. So maybe I should instead be saying direct staff to explore expanding or something like that, where it's clear that you're not saying, you know.
I think that would be my preference. And the only reason I say it is because I think there's been lots of discussion and all of that stuff on changing the size of the lot requirement. And I feel like I don't think there's strong opposition to it, hopefully. And I feel like that's kind of been talked about a lot. And I feel like I'm confident to say, yeah, let's proceed kind of thing. I feel like this one, if you're expanding that definition to now include trailers, I think that needs more community engagement. That needs a lot more talk about. So to kind of lump it in with this change, I wouldn't be in favor of that, but I would totally be in favor of exploring it. And sorry, I'm just speaking for myself, obviously not for the committee. So I don't know, Ron, Fritz, and if anybody else wants to jump in, but I'd be absolutely in favor of exploring it, but I do think it would need engagement to some level, because that's a pretty big change. And it's like literally could be one word, but it could be a huge change, but hopefully a welcome change, but it does have implications. Yeah. Fritz?
Yeah, I just want to say that the difference between attached and detached, right? I mean, it sounds kind of obvious, but in my mind it's not. It has a lot to do with the setback regulations, because detached normally means that you can have it in a setback area where you're normally not allowed to build your home, right? So it's a huge difference. So the, like, to give you an example, for attached within specific setbacks where you already can have the massing of the house, right? I would say, who cares how big the attached, how big the secondary suite is? And the reason is that as an owner, you may live in the smaller one anyway, and make it flexible. But if it's detached and Bowen is a bit weak with its setbacks, like in most municipalities, the setbacks really restrict the footprint of the home, right? But in many lots in Bowen, it doesn't. So then what is really the key difference between detached and attached?
Okay. Any other thoughts on this question? So Daniel, I think, would you like a recommendation from us then today? So,
I mean, I guess it's, if the Housing Advisory Committee agrees and is comfortable with that, or if instead we want to have it something that's on the on the work plan to discuss more fully in a meeting. We just thought, if this is something that, we want to bring to council's attention with the detached secondary suite review, it would go forward in this way, or it can instead be something that we discuss at future committee meetings.
My concern is there's some urgency here. I mean, there are people who don't have homes. And so I would be in support of the recommendation as revised. But I also would point you to the agenda item that deals with the Ucluelet worker housing project, which does deal with trailers on lots, temporary use permits, and so forth. And I would, in addition to the recommendation that's on the table right now, I'd like this committee to offer its opinion on whether it would be appropriate to go forward or to recommend to council that they consider exploring a worker housing project along the lines of what Ucluelet has done. And apparently they've done so for a number of years. It's not clear from that article. So it's going to be April next month.
Yeah.
And we're going into summer season, and people are in need.
I would definitely be in favor of, and I'm just speaking personally, I would definitely be in favor of initiating something like that, of saying, hey, as a very fast emergency measure, let's introduce temporary use permits in the style of what UCLUET did. And it's a way to achieve that, the idea that people could put a trailer, an RV or whatever very quickly onto their property. But I feel like it's, and I know probably there's lots of discussion about temporary use permits, but I feel like then it's also not this immediate change overnight, that it's permanent, it's in the bylaw, anybody can do it for forever until it changes on Bowen. I feel like the temporary use permit, for better or worse, is a great mechanism because it allows it to happen pretty quickly now. For whatever number of years, I can't remember if it's 1, 2, 3 years or if that's optional. And it just says, hey, there's an emergency right now, let's do it. And then let's take some more time to figure out if this is a permanent change or not. Let's see what the uptake is. Let's see what the result is. So I'd absolutely be in favor of a recommendation to initiate a temporary use permit and a streamlined temporary use permit for people to initiate worker housing on their property. I'd totally be in favor of that today. How does everybody else in the committee feel?
Yeah, it's good. Oh,
Yeah, Ron's seeing nodding heads. Yeah, anybody?
yeah, it's good.
Okay, great. Okay, so
I had put a motion for that one too, as sort of a next phase or next item. So that the HAC recommend council direct staff to prepare a report exploring a worker housing project pilot similar to the District of UCLUET pilot project.
Okay.
Don't move.
Yes, and I the only thing I would add to that is it would be like urgently, like urgently to, if we can, because I'm hearing you, Maureen, like, can we get this in effect in April or May? Like, and again, I guess the temporary use permits is in there because it's modeled after that one that was temporary use permits, but I don't know if it's worth saying that, but yes, I'd be in favor of that. Okay, so Maureen has moved. I will second. Is everybody in favor of that? I don't know if we have to do this for these recommendations, but we might as well get everybody on record. Perfect. Okay, so that recommendation is moved. Sophie, you've got that.
I do.
Okay.
Did we want to add the word urgently somewhere in there?
Sure.
So urgently direct staff?
Yeah, because I hear you, Maureen. It's urgent. It needs to be addressed quickly. And then is there anything else? Any other feedback, Daniel, on that lot size or anything, or it was about reviewing the definition?
No, that was it.
That was it. Okay. Okay, so that addresses it.
I don't think we actually voted on that recommendation though.
No, we need a separate one, right? To say that we recommend that staff explore, including trailer or mobile homes as part of the definition of accessory dwelling units or whatever our language is in our land use bylaw. Is that what you're thinking, Maureen? That recommendation?
Daniel had added tiny homes in the recommendation.
Right.
And I guess, and I guess where I've been thinking separately, I guess so one is like the TUP idea for summer temporary housing could potentially be the trailer RV type housing, whereas in this, if this was permitted, this wouldn't be. This would be something that would still be, so maybe it's tiny home or mobile home or something. We're saying it's not necessarily not an RV, wouldn't fit that definition, but it would be more like a mobile home.
I think we'd have to be specific because it's, in my mind, it's either it's permanent and it's on a foundation, or it's not permanent and it's on wheels. Like I think there's a lot of words that we could use to describe those different dwelling types, but I think it's either permanently on a foundation or it's on wheels. And I think those are the two things to separate. So yeah, I wouldn't be in favor at this point of including the definition of a home on wheels being included in this latest update of the definition and the land use bylaw for secondary suites. Do other people feel differently? That's just me. But I think we should, I think the recommendation should be that staff explore that and engage the community in a discussion of including that as a definition of secondary dwelling or whatever, accessory dwelling use.
Okay.
But it makes me think about John Reid, who says if it's far enough and you park it in the bushes, or like then people say, well, yeah, what's the issue? But I guess that's kind of playing, like how visible, how obstructive, how does it affect other people?
Yeah, that's my only concern, because if we're in one sweep changing the lot size and including that, it means I'm just again, it's not my personal opinion, it's more thinking about the community as a whole. I don't think that would be well received as a really quick change in the community. I think that's a lot too fast without any engagement. And it would mean, a lot of whatever size, in these, smaller communities, not acres, like a half acre, quarter acre lot, if they had the space, could just all of a sudden get a trailer put on their property. I feel like that's a big change to people and has not been discussed much.
I think potentially too, I mean, I don't know, but the potential is there for it to have similar regulations. So when we brought in detached secondary suite, it's this size. So maybe it would say, the accessory resident would say, okay, detached secondary suite, maybe council reduces the size or removes minimum lot size. But whatever the other definition is for the, trailer dwelling has a minimum lot size as well, as a way to, again, it's sort of staggered come in, where John was talking about, well, if you're on, I forgot what he said, 2 acres or 5 acres or, so it's potential that's what happens, is that, okay, any house gets an attached suite, and detached is, this committee recommended no minimum lot size, or maybe council says, well, it's a half acre. And then the sort of mobile dwelling, whatever we want to call it, again, can have a similar stepped in thing.
Maybe the mobile dwelling, goes to the same step that we just did, the 0.9 hectare or whatever it was. So that's a new introduction, see how that goes. And then I would probably, I don't know, what does everybody else think about the DP process for that? And similar to what's current, right? So on a large lot, if you're X number of meters from the property line and whatever, you don't need a DP. And so that's that theory, right? If you have 5 acres and it's heavily wooded and you can throw a trailer in there, it's not going to bother anybody, have at her, right? Whereas if it's actually going to be near your neighbors and they're going to see it visually and all that stuff, it should, I would think, that's the kind of the principle so far, it should go through a DP process.
Yeah, but so it's the actual regulations, because like, if there's distance, if there is screening, if there is landscaping, whatever, right?
Yeah.
But if that's not there and people conveniently put it, if it's a 10-acre lot, but you put it right against your neighbor, then the neighbor is not happy. It's just like, it's not the size of the lot, it's how you deal with it, how you situate it.
And I think that's what those DP requirements address, right? I can't remember what the number is, but you have to be X number of meters from a property line, and it's a fair way to avoid the DP for a detached secondary suite. So I think that's what those address. So I'd be in favor of, I don't know how we write this recommendation. I apologize, already we're over time. Do we write a recommendation that says we would be in favor of introducing this, home on wheels? I don't know what words we use, a trailer style home, or maybe, non-permanent foundation, something like that, home, with a similar introduction as previously, starting with the 0.9 hectares and the similar DP requirements.
Yes, maybe the outright or development permit or conditional. Like if you can say it's outright if it's close to the home, like
or further from the property line, really is because it's the neighbors.
Yeah, but I put it really blunt. Like if you make it almost attached to the home, then there's far less chance that there is any backlash, right? But so I'm saying if something outright is like a no-brainer, it has impact on the owner, but not much impact on the neighbors. And if it's conditional, then it's already acknowledged that it can have impact on the neighbors, and therefore there may be opposition against it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay, so what I wrote now is I said, direct staff to explore expanding the definition to include, and then I put in quotes, homes on non-permanent foundations, in addition to secondary suites and detached secondary suites with appropriate regulations for their use, including development permit and minimum lot size requirements.
I'd be in favor of that.
Yeah, that's general enough. Yeah, sure.
Yeah. Okay, great. So I'll move that. Do we have a seconder?
Yeah,
Michael, and then all in favor. Yeah. So we'll pass that recommendation. Excellent. And was there another, just before we wrap up, because I'm sorry, I know we're over time. I know, Ron, you wrote something, and I don't know if we address it today. I think it's maybe a bigger one. I think that this committee should at some point, maybe not today, but at some point we should be recommending a review of the OCP. That needs to happen to address current housing needs, because the OCP as it stands is, I feel, not a reflection of the current sentiment of the community on housing. So, but I think let's not address that today, since we're over time. Let's put that on the agenda for next time, maybe as a discussion point, and we can dive into that. If there's nothing further, I'd love to get us all on with the rest of our day. So I think Yeah, thank you so much, Maureen, for those references for those pilot projects. And I think if you haven't read it yet, everybody, the BC housing case study for what they call it for the accessory dwelling units, I think is really good to look at and has, like you said, some nice graphics. So great. Okay. If nothing else, we will conclude the meeting. And next meeting. Yes, Ron, go ahead.
Next meeting.
Yes, thank you. So next meeting, because we do not have a regular date so far, although we have been doing the last Monday of the month. Do we want to do that again? So on the 25th, or I know Michael and Maureen, maybe you prefer to line it up with the council meetings. So I'm flexible. We do have Easter Monday on the 18th, so obviously that's not going to work. So likely it to be the 25th or the following of April, or Monday the 2nd of May, which wouldn't be great for me, but I can make it work.
25th works for me.
Yes,
Yeah.
I'd rather the 25th than the 2nd.
Yeah.
Although Maureen,
better for
I
me.
see we do have a council meeting on the evening of the 2nd. Not that that necessarily makes any difference to you, but we do have a. But I mean, if it's the 25th, it's the 25th, and I mean, I think no day is going to be perfect, and Monday isn't, because the trouble is it's the opening up of the week, and you tend to be, I don't know about you, but you're bombarded by people who suddenly want to woken up after the weekend and decide to sort of offload their in tray into yours,
right?
And so you're kind of out there, but it's got to be some date. So why don't we say the 25th and
okay.
And you're
That
kind
works.
enough to keep the meetings tight, so which I appreciate. So that's great.
I try.
Yeah, you do.
Okay.
And so
I try. Okay, thanks everybody. So we'll make it Monday the 25th, 9:30, our usual time, and we will see you then. Thank you so much, Sophie, for jumping in and keeping our minutes.
No problem.
Okay, thanks everybody.